The Lecturer by John Kessel. Originally published in an anthology entitled Light Years and Dark, Science Fiction and Fantasy of and for Our Time in 1984, then in a German one called Kopernikus 14 in 1986, republished in 4 collections of the author's stories, Meeting in Infinity, Allegories and Extrapolations in 1992, The Pure Product in 1997, The Collected Kessel in 2012, and The Dark Ride, the best short fiction of John Kessel in 2022. Read by Daryl T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. The Lecturer. I had, of course, heard about the lecturer before I accepted the position at the university. Stories of him had reached the West Coast, but his was not the kind of notoriety that makes any deep impression. The university, though large and reasonably well known, was not first-rate, and the lecturer's existence was less remarked upon than the record of the school's football team. None of this mattered to me. I could scarcely care less about unique features of the campus. All I knew was that no one had worked harder than I had to earn a degree, and no one deserved a tenure-track position more. When I received the job offer, I felt a triumph that did not lessen my bitterness. When I told my friends, they did not talk about the lecturer, but about how severe the winters in the Northeast were. The move exhausted both of us. Jane and I worked very hard, trying to make something of the small house we were able to rent on an assistant professor's salary. Money was tight for some time, and Jane was unable to find work. Yet it seemed we were quite happy at first. We spent our evenings reading or listening to music. We took turns cooking. We took walks on the Saturdays of that Indian summer through the wooded lanes outside the town. When the possibility of a job at the university gallery fell through, Jane concentrated on her painting, ran off some flyers, and started teaching a class in oils out of our home. Each morning, I would rise early and walk up to the campus, which was only 5 blocks from our house. The department was located in a building on the far side of the quadrangle, and so I would have to walk past the lecturer where he stood on the truncated Greek pillar at the top of the slope in front of the library. The first few times I strolled by self-consciously, trying to act as if I were accustomed to him. I kept my eyes on the buildings ahead and gripped the handle of my briefcase tighter. I did not hear what he was saying. A few days later, I was comfortable enough with the new surroundings to stop for some minutes and listen. It was soon after classes had started, and the campus bustled with students. A few sprawled on the grass of the quadrangle, and a nervous freshman here and there had also stopped to listen. Other students threw their frisbees past him. The first notable feature of contemporary architecture is its concern with a greater and more profound reality than that encompassed by the psyche of one individual, he was saying. The proper focus of architecture, the modernist tells us, is on the space outside the individual and the clash of impersonal forces within that outer space. There is no place in architecture for the kind of philosophy that sees reality as determined by individual perception. He looked exactly like a stocky, middle-aged man. His legs were short and strong, and he had the neck of a pit bulldog. He was not going to get fat. His complexion was florid, his hair bright red, thinning on top, and a bushy mustache dominated his face. I was later told that during the 60s he had worn his hair long with a red bandana tied around his head, and I came across an old yearbook photograph of him taken in the 1890s that showed him with full beard, neatly trimmed, and flowing academic robes. My first September at the university he wore a wool suit despite the high heat of the waning summer, and he was to wear that same suit through the year, adding a scarf and heavy overcoat as winter approached. He spoke vigorously. Gestures of his right arm would punctuate his rhetoric. Spreading his fingers, he would slice home a point with a sweep of his extended hand. His voice was strong, if rather high-pitched. His tone was dogmatic. There could be no doubt, it told us, that the things he said were the absolute truth. Architecture is not one of my interests, and I soon moved on to my office. I had had to listen to too much of such academic sausage grinding in my graduate career. Now that I had moved on, I worked hard at teaching, rewriting my dissertation for publication, and being agreeable to all factions in my new department. Yet he bothered me, perhaps especially because he seemed to bother no one else. I could not keep myself from occasionally thinking about the man on the pedestal. The responses of my colleagues to my questions were not illuminating. Once, at lunch, I managed to turn the conversation around to the lecturer. "Why do they keep him around?" I asked. "Nobody's keeping him," said Duthie, whose specialty was the restoration. "He's free to do whatever he likes. You might as well ask why they keep the weather." Judy Boisner, who wore bright scarves and a grin, said, "It's a tradition, like the exam policy and the Chancellor's Oak." I nodded at both of them. I was not skeptical. "Nobody knows," old Dr. White said, not lifting his eyes from his corned beef on rye. "I wondered once. I was convinced there was a good reason. It doesn't matter." "I see," I said. Kilworthy, sitting next to me, said nothing. Later, as we walked back to our offices, shoulders hunched and hands holding lapels closed against a cold breeze, he told me the real reason was political. "The lecturer has nothing to do with the university." His voice was bright with eagerness to initiate me. "It's all a matter of creating the proper impression on those whose decisions can really make a difference to the people who want to continue in positions of comfortable security and influence in this circus. Ask yourself, who stands to gain the most from such a creature as the lecturer?" I opened the door for him, and we shook ourselves in the warmth of the hallway. We retreated to our separate offices. I had no idea what Kilworthy was talking about. I doubted that he did himself. Our small house smelled of the oils with which Jane and her few students cluttered the spare bedroom. The artistic crowd, or more accurately, the crowd of artistic dilettantes, Jane was keeping company with, did not appeal to me. I began to spend more time on campus reading, grading papers, sitting in my office staring out the window at the treetops, gazing absently down at the footpaths crisscrossing the quad. In November, I assigned the students in my composition class a paper on the lecturer, a 500-word description. Many of the male students wrote papers that began like this: "Throughout history, there has been many types of institutions of higher learning from the Middle Ages until now. Many of these presented the university professor as the originator of information it was useful for the students to have. Here at State is the home of the famous lecturer that is renowned not only for his superior brain and his intellectual lecturers, but also the ability of anyone that touches his shoe before a date to have sexual relations that very night." Few of the women mentioned shoes or sex. During conferences that week, I made some inquiries and discovered that rubbing the lecturer for luck was authentic campus folklore. For sure, Chuck Benetti, a freshman, told me. The unspoken truth was that the lecturer was unconscionably boring, and the students realized it, and the only notice they took of him, such as that surrounding the sex charm stories, was the result of their boredom. Before homecoming, students from arch-rival Syracuse would paint the lecturer orange, but it aroused little indignation on campus, and it did not slow him down. His methods for dealing with hecklers were antiquated. According to Faraday's law, the line integral of the electric field around a closed path is equal to the time rate of change of the flux of the magnetic field calculated over the open surface bounded by the path of integration. Shut up! Shut up! I don't want to hear it! A young man walking across the quad would shout, while his companions burst into laughter. The lecturer would ignore him. If the surface of integration is fixed in space— "You mean lost in space, airhead?" one of the others would shout. The lecturer then might actually look at them and smile. Not a smile of superior knowledge or tolerance or contempt. Not a smile older than the university, than any university. "No applause," he might say then. "Just throw money." "I'm in pain," the first student would say. "I'm laughing so hard, Grandpa." "Stop laughing and listen, bub. You might learn something. If the surface of integration is—" "Shut up!" He would stop. "Student here wants to speak. What do you want to tell us, student?" "Screw you." "That's all?" "Screw you, asshole. Screw you." "Thanks very much," the lecturer would say. "If the surface of integration is fixed—" I saw one such encounter late in the semester, a day when I was preoccupied with late papers and my first committee assignment. It made me unaccountably melancholy. On impulse, I walked up to his pedestal. It was around 6, dark already. The campus was virtually empty of students, and the regular staff had all gone home. No one paid any attention after the hecklers moved away. The lecturer glanced down at me without pausing in his delineation of the ideals of Jeffersonian democracy. I reached out and touched his left shoe. The leather was dull from generations of furtive contacts. I wondered that it had not been worn away entirely. Perhaps these were not the same shoes that he had worn 50 years before, but to begin to consider the source of his clothing was to open the first Chinese box in an infinite series of boxes, with little assurance of an answer in the opening and less that one would ever be able to stop. I had a slight smudge of dirt on my fingertips, nothing more. Feeling foolish, I returned to my office and a stack of ungraded papers. The first flakes of the winter storm that had been predicted for that evening, the first of the season, had begun falling outside my window when a knock caused me to look up from the paper on which I was working. Stacy Branham, a student in my post-war American fiction class, stood uncertainly in the doorway. It was quite late for an office visit. "Yes, Stacy?" I said. "What's up?" She shifted from foot to foot. "Can I talk to you about my term paper?" "Sure." She came in, closing the door behind her. I put the papers aside. She sat on the edge of the chair beside my desk and told me she was having trouble coming up with things to say. I had never noticed this problem as she dealt deftly with the boys who talked to her before and after class. She was a tall, slender blonde with intelligent gray eyes. I had more than once watched her cross her legs in the first row of seats in the Walton Annex, Lecture Hall B. It soon became clear that she had not come to talk about her term paper, and that she had not happened by in the early evening when the Humanities building was deserted by accident. She put her purse on the floor beside her, drew her chair closer, and as she leaned forward to ask an earnest question about Flannery O'Connor, rested her finely manicured hand on my leg. "Stacy," I said, "you're not really interested in Flannery O'Connor, are you?" "Yes, I am. Everything that rises must converge is my favorite story." "Well," I was nervous, "it's a masterpiece of irony. That's what I'm having trouble with." She smiled. I drew a deep breath. She smelled of Chanel. I wheeled my chair back suddenly. "Why don't you come back then, when you've worked out your ideas more completely?" She looked puzzled, a little frightened. "I didn't mean to—" "No problem. I'll see you in class Friday, right?" She took her purse and left. drawing her wool coat tighter around her hips as she swirled out the door. I sat there for some time, closed my eyes, breathed slowly. My mind was without thought. I looked down at my hands resting on the desk. They shook ever so slightly, and I realized that I was terrified. There was a smudge of dirt on the first 2 fingers of my right hand. By the time I left the building, a couple of inches of snow had accumulated. Instead of crossing the quad, I went down the access road behind the building so that I could avoid him. It was one of those crisp, cold nights on which sound carries for great distances. I could faintly hear his voice, despite the still falling snow. My vision seemed exceptionally clear. I could see every swirling flake in the pools of light beneath the streetlights. I felt my warm breath on my face, the moisture freezing in my mustache. I saw the condensation in the air. My footsteps made no sound on the sidewalk. Jane had already eaten, and I could hear her in the studio with one of her students, Marcia, when I reached home. I didn't go up to say hello. Instead, I fixed my own supper from the lukewarm stroganoff on the stove and the day-old salad in the refrigerator. I watched part of one of the Shakespeare plays, A Midsummer Night's Dream, on PBS, and went to bed before it was over. Marcia hadn't left yet. I got into bed and turned off the light, but could not get to sleep. Papers remained to be graded. Stacy Branham remained to be faced. The man remained speaking on the quadrangle as snow caught and melted in his hair. I could hear the low voices of Jane and Marcia, but could not make out more than a few words of Jane's instructions on how to use the palette knife. I got up and washed the dirt from my fingers. When Jane came to bed, I was still not asleep. The clock radio read 12:17. "I'm sorry I woke you," she said quietly. "That's okay. It's late." "Marcia stayed to talk and have some wine." I turned from her, adjusted my arm beneath my pillow. After a moment, I felt her touch my back. "What's the matter?" she asked. "Nothing," I answered quickly, then said more slowly, "I don't know." "You want me to stop this class?" I still did not turn to her. "No, it's important that you teach." She moved close, slipped her arm under mine, and held me. We lay silent for a while. Her breath was warm against my back. She moved her leg over my hip. I rolled onto my back, and she slid on top of me. We made love with an intensity we hadn't had in a very long time. Jane needed me. The shock of that burned each moment into my senses. I realized that I needed her as much, if not more, and wondered that we had been living together for the last 3 months, and before that, back in California, so unaware of each other that we might only have been sharing an office. These truths came to me without thought, showed themselves in a carnality that was frightening in directness and austerity. Jane rocked over me with her eyes closed, the lines at their corners drawn so tight she looked to be in pain. I ran my hands over her hips and waist. Her skin was feverish. The muscles of my belly were tight. My back arched. I cried and held Jane to me as if to make up for years of indifference in those few moments, as if we were doing penance for a multitude of casual sins, as if I might never have her again. She touched my face. Jane fell asleep as if she had been poisoned. I lay awake while my sweat slowly dried. I shivered in the cold bedroom, wondering what had happened. Where were we? How had we gotten there? The lecturer, like the body of a drowned man surfacing in a lake days after the storm that drew him under, he rose to trouble my circling thoughts. He came to the center, and he did not go away. He did not go away. I tried to concentrate on the sound of Jane's slow breathing, the ticking of the furnace, the soft flip as the clock counted out each minute, the wind outside. I could not keep him out. I slipped quietly out of bed, pulled on clothes, and left Jane asleep. Unable to find my gloves, I threw on my coat and headed up to the campus, hands jammed into my pockets. It was bitterly cold. I walked briskly, but my feet were soon freezing. I could hear his voice before I could see him. He was speaking as strongly, gesturing as fervently as he did when there were people up and around to hear him. Instead, he faced an unbroken sweep of snow that ran 200 yards from the library, over footpaths, beneath lampposts and trees, to the administration building at the other end of the quadrangle. As I approached, he turned to me, and I could make out what he was saying. Descartes' second objection to placing faith in the reality of sensory experience amounts to this. However good our empirical evidence may be for the proposition that, for instance, we see a man, another feeling being, in front of us, such evidence is never good enough that reason is forced to accept it. The creature we see might be a diabolically ingenious conjuring trick by the malignant demon. And this possibility of error will apply to any empirical proposition. To be true, it must be certified in a way stronger than any amount of empirical evidence could ever provide. I stopped directly in front of him, in a snowdrift halfway to my knees. I looked up at him. He looked down at me. He kept talking. I want to speak to you, I said. Descartes found his solution in mathematics. Please listen to me, I said. I'm doing the talking. You listen. You might learn something. In mathematics, some propositions we know to be intuitively true. What are you doing? How did you come to be here? He then smiled, that vacant smile. He sighed, and his breath fogged the air. Student here has something to say. Speak up, student. That legend about you. Does what happened to me mean that it's true? Accept as true only what can clearly and distinctly be perceived as being so. My face burned. What's that supposed to mean? I said, angrily. The words you say don't mean anything. Things happen anyway. Analyze any problem into its simplest possible elements. The snow had gathered so thickly on his head that the strong light from the lamps behind him gave him a glittering halo. He ought to have caught pneumonia. Damn you, give me a straight answer. I don't give answers, I give lectures. He towered over me, so obtuse he might have been made of stone. Suddenly I could not stand it. I leaped forward and grabbed his leg with both of my hands. He was taken by surprise, I think. This had to have happened to him before, but perhaps he did not expect violence from someone asking the bitter questions that only a man who didn't have any answers, a faculty member, would ask. I tugged furiously. I screamed at him, not knowing what or why I screamed. He slipped momentarily, regained his balance, and beat me on the head and shoulders with his fists. My rage grew and gave me a blind strength. I braced my leg against the pedestal and jerked harder, and this time, when he lost his footing, he came tumbling down on top of me. We sprawled in the snow. Once I had him off, I lost my purpose. He struggled out of my grasp and got to his feet. He was breathing hard. He was just another man, like me. He might have been Duthie. He might have been Kilworthy. Excuse me, he said, and climbed back onto the pedestal. That was 15 years ago. He's still out there. He's still talking. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.